attacks continues in Israel and the West Bank with two separate incidents today, one of them committed in Beit Shemesh by two Hamas members. On the diplomatic front, John Kerry calls for an end to the violence during a meeting in Berlin with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Washington condemns Russia's red carpet treatment of Bashar al-Assad during his visit to Moscow. The U.S. is set to convene a summit Friday on the crisis, which will be attended by Russian representatives. And Democratic presidential frontrunner Hillary Clinton testifies before a congressional committee investigating the deadly 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the News Today. The wave of violence continued today with attacks increasingly occurring in the West Bank. Two members of Hamas stabbed an Orthodox Jew in Beit Shemesh, raising fears the group might become more involved in the terror. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts to end the bloodshed are in high gear. Israel's Prime Minister meeting today in Germany with John Kerry and Federica Mogherini. I-24 News correspondent Ur Shapira recaps Thursday's events.
Another day of violence in Israel and in the West Bank, while diplomatic efforts to end the crisis continue. In the early morning, an 18-year-old student was moderately wounded by a Palestinian near a synagogue in the city of Beit Shemesh, southwest of Jerusalem. The assailants in Beit Shemesh were wearing T-shirts with Hamas slogans, perhaps another indication that extremist jihadist groups in the West Bank and Gaza are getting involved in the ongoing violence. Some hours later, in the afternoon, a Palestinian terrorist attempted unsuccessfully to stab an Israeli soldier near the West Bank city of Hebron. Meanwhile, the behind-the-scenes attempts to resolve the crisis continue. EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini called for a Middle East Quartet meeting Friday.
I will be there together with Kerry, Lavrov and the Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General to coordinate messages, to pass a strong message to the parties to calm down the situation on the ground.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Berlin Thursday.
There's no question that this wave of attacks is driven directly by incitement from Hamas, incitement from the Islamist movement in Israel, and incitement, I'm sorry to say, from President Abbas, the Palestinian Authority.
Kerry said the meeting gave him a cautious measure of optimism that the tension in the region could be diffused.
But if parties want to try, and I believe they do, want to move to a de-escalation, I think there are a set of choices that are available.
Thursday's attack in Beit Shemesh raised fears of much greater involvement by terror organizations in the current escalation. However, according to Adnan Wright, the head of the Fatah-affiliated Tanzim militant organization, the assailants are not waiting for instructions from anyone when they strike. And as the efforts to end the crisis continue to come from the top, on the ground, the streets are still burning.
And with me here in the studio is Avi Zacharo, Middle East analyst. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
And also Yitzhak Levanon, former Israeli ambassador to Egypt. Ambassador Levanon, good evening. Thank you very much
Lucy.
For coming. Gentlemen, I want to talk with you today especially about maybe the more and more deterioration situation in what is happening right now. And now, if a week ago you sat here and you told me, Lucy, we're seeing that the West Bank is not taking part in what is happening today, this conversation changes.
Yes, mainly about Hebron, by the way, Hebron area. You know, today the two terrorists came from Tzurif, a village not far from Hebron and not far from Bethlehem also. Very old and famous, notorious village that a few groups from Hamas, armed wing, the Izzadin al-Qassam, came out from during the 90s, during the former decade. At the end of the day, I think that, then again, it's not that the public in general is joining. I was yesterday in Ramallah. I haven't seen thousands nor tens of thousands in the streets or going out there to confront the Israeli army. I think that we have more and more attacks like that. It's in Jerusalem, it's in Hebron, and probably we'll see more of that. And every day that will pass by, we will see, and this is of course only my estimation, we will see more cities joining into this huge mess, into this new kind of war or craziness, but it's not going to stay only about Jerusalem and Hebron, and this is the sad
Explain
thing.
to me the arrest of Hassan Youssef, the head of Hamas in the West Bank.
Look, for years we warned that there's going to be an explosion. Now, the explosion took place, it happened. Now you need an exit plan. The problem is that there's no exit plan for the Israeli leadership. There's no exit plan for the Palestinian leadership. But nothing is, you don't see anything in the horizon. So what can you do for the meanwhile? Do all kinds of measures, punishment measures against Hamas, against the Palestinian population that might decrease the pressure from the Israeli public. Now, arresting someone like Sheikh Hassan Youssef might be right. You know, he's a spiritual leader of Hamas. He's part of the incitement from Hamas against Israel. Okay, but let us not be mistaken or illusioned by this. This is not going to be the thing that is going to change the face of this new intifada or this new war. Hassan Youssef is not the one that is pushing the youth to go and stab Israelis.
You know, Ambassador Lebanon, we are constantly hearing from the Israeli side, from the Israeli government, that there is no partner on the other side. That Mahmoud Abbas is inciting against the Israelis, that Mahmoud Abbas is no partner for peace. On the same sentence, when Benjamin Netanyahu is saying that the hand of Israel is being reached for peace and Israel wants peace, but it cannot do it with Mahmoud Abbas. So with who Israel plans to do it, if it wants to do it and go back to the negotiation table?
Well, first of all, Lucy, let me put things into proportion. It's not the whole state of Israel who says there is no partnership, or the whole state of Israel who says that Mahmoud Abbas or the President Abu Mazen is not a partner. You have a substantial part of the Jewish or the Israeli population who believes that President Abbas is indeed a partner. But the reality on the ground is completely different. The problem is that there is a huge mistrust between both sides. I'm talking about the leadership of Israel and the leadership of the Palestinians led by President Mahmoud Abbas. The question is if you can bridge over this mistrust or not. To my view, it is going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult because of the personalities that we are dealing with. You see, Mahmoud Abbas, he's somebody, he says, you know, that he is from Nazareth, no, from Safed.
From Safed.
He was born in Safed, and he is a refugee, but he doesn't intend, you know, to go back to Safed. But deep inside his mind, he cannot do anything with the question of the right of return on the level of the principle, because he is himself, you know, a refugee. So he cannot move on that, you know, path. Exactly like...
He said the sentence to an Israeli media. He said the sentence basically to the Israelis, telling them, I'm not planning to go back to my village.
But he cannot desist, you know, from the claim that the Palestinians have the right to return. He cannot do it. Exactly like, you know, Arafat was not able to do other things. Now, the other side, you know, if you will take the Israeli leadership.
I'm sorry that I'm just putting just a small point before we will continue on the second point that you want to speak about. I just want to go to our I-24 News military correspondent, Shai Ben-Ari, who is in Jerusalem. Shai, again, Jerusalem today. In Gush Etzion, I'm sorry, you're not in Jerusalem. So what? Just try to just do some recap about the recent events that happened today.
Right. Well, we're talking about Gush Etzion, of course, is a section of the West Bank immediately to the south of Jerusalem. When you talk about this intersection here, this is the main intersection in Gush Etzion. This was the site of an attack last Tuesday, the bus stop that you can perhaps make out behind me there. And indeed, there have been numerous attacks over recent years and months at this location, and indeed in the area surrounding, as well as to the south, more towards the city of Hebron, the large West Bank city of Hebron. We're talking about a situation where most of the violence recently, in recent days and even a week or two, has drifted towards this area, the area surrounding Hebron and this area, Gush Etzion. Today, there was, of course, a very interesting or a very lethal attack in Bet Shemesh, where one person was basically moderately injured by two attackers who stabbed him with a knife. They were later basically shot by police who managed to arrive on the scene. One of them was shot dead. The other was seriously wounded. And what was interesting about this case was it turned out they were wearing shirts basically with the emblem Jerusalem of the Azadin al-Qassam brigades, which is, of course, the military wing of Hamas. We're talking about two 20-year-olds from the village of Tzurif, which is a village very close to the Hebron area. The Hebron area is known for its support of Hamas within the Palestinian population. It's a more conservative area, and indeed there is a lot of support, unfortunately, for terrorism within this area. And we're indeed, like I said, we're talking about most of the attacks focusing on this area. And indeed, despite the fact that this attack happened in Beit Shemesh, which is in Israel proper, the attackers, again, were from this area where we are. So we're talking about an increase in the level of violence. And it's interesting to note that despite the fact that these people were wearing Hamas shirts, there has been no official declaration of responsibility from the Hamas movement itself. I'm talking about the higher levels. So it seems that Hamas is playing a sort of double game at this stage. It has not gone to the lengths of actually officially announcing it has joined this sort of uprising. More on the feelings of people in this region from Davidi Pearl, who is the head of the Gush Etzion Regional Council, who we spoke with.
It's very hard to think in that head what they're going to do. We can see that all over Israel they're trying, one day in Beersheba, other day in Beit Shemesh, and in this week we was in the day after day in the middle of the terror acts. I think there is no right question. The question is about where all this is going, and in my view, we can't know where it's to go. What we have to make decision, what we want to do against it, and we have to stay strong and say that we are going to stay here forever, all over Israel and here in Judea and Samaria.
Yes, Shai, I want to speak with you a little bit about, let's say, military or, let's say, security measures that the military is trying to take one step forward. We are seeing that basically the military each and every day is conducting some arrests in the West Bank. And what I am trying to understand is that when nobody in the entire world can actually deal with the lone wolf terror attacks, it seems that today there was some kind of, let's say, change, because it seems that they wanted to go on a bus. It seems that they wanted to maybe do a bigger terror attack. And I'm asking myself if the security the security in Israel is preparing itself for a deterioration to the, let's say, 2000, to the period of times where buses were exploding in Israel.
Yes, well, you know, right now we're still not talking about those kinds of terrorist attacks. There is a certain fear within the Israeli security establishment that perhaps Hamas could turn to that path. We have not seen that yet. We know that the Hamas leader in the West Bank is now in an Israeli prison after being arrested earlier this week. We know that Hamas operatives are now carrying out attacks, but we don't know for certain that these directives are coming from the upper levels of Hamas. Again, Hamas is in a very weak position, and when it comes to the security question, we see certain security measures that appear to have been very effective carried out in Jerusalem. Indeed, the level of violence in Jerusalem has basically dropped to almost zero over the past week. But Jerusalem is a very different story to what is happening here. Here we're talking about open roads mainly. Most of the attacks have happened in relatively open areas, not even in the alleyways of Hebron. There have been certain incidents there as well, but most of these attacks have happened in relatively open areas. In terms of security, that is a much bigger challenge in trying to prevent these kinds of attacks. And indeed, I'm not sure the IDF right now has a solution. There are all sorts of ideas on the table, but we're still not talking, fortunately, about a case of suicide bombing. Still, many of these attacks, even now, I think, can still be characterized as lone wolf attacks, even if they are carried out by Hamas operatives.
Yes, Shai Ben Ari, thank you very, very much for this. I stopped you in a certain point where you said that some people in the Israeli government are not seeing Mahmoud Abbas as a partner, but the other side maybe is.
The population. But look, there is another problem, you know, with the Israeli side. You see, since the visit of Sadat to Jerusalem till today, when he expressed exactly what the Palestinians would like to see, meaning 67 borders, you know, Jerusalem as the capital, etc., the Palestinians have expressed their wish in a very clear manner of what they want, and they didn't move 1 inch. In the same period, you don't have any position given by the Israelis
what the
Israelis would like. So it complicates the situation, because from one side we have a party who says, look, this is what I want. So let's argue, let's discuss, let's go back to the table of negotiations, but the other side is not saying exactly what I want. And this is number one. Number two, which complicates even more the situation, and I think that Avi, he can elaborate on this much better because he meets the people. I think that there is a subterranean, clash or competition, let's say, between the Tunis people, Abu Mazen and all this staff, and the young who are graduated from the Israeli prison, kind of Dakhlan, etc., who says, look, we are the genuine leaders. We would like, to lead whenever it is. And in this is going to complicate the complete situation in order to have, a kind of a solution. But there is one thing which, in my mind, it's a must. You cannot continue with this situation forever.
You want to argue?
Well, I don't totally agree with Ambassador Lebanon. I think that the message that I've been hearing from the Palestinian side is even clearer than from the Israeli side. The Israeli side is saying we want two states, but it's doing the opposite. The Palestinian, when you sit with them, with Palestinian officials, they will say, yes, we want negotiations over two states on the borders of 1967. We want the Israelis to stop the violence that is coming from the settlers. We want going back to the status quo in the Temple Mountain, back to the old status quo before 28th of September 2000. Meaning they know what they want exactly. The problem is that here, there's no government that is capable to give them even something close that will enable the two sides to sit together around the table and even discuss peace. I mean, if they...
This is what I'm saying, Avi. So you do not disagree with me. You agree with me.
Yes,
this is what I'm saying.
Yes, but I do not disagree with you about the young leadership or the younger leadership in the Palestinian Authority. The younger leadership is not that young anymore. Dakhlan and Rajub and this. And of course, they challenge Abbas.
It represents jail, versus Tunis.
They challenge Abbas and Kharaj and Dakhel, the old equation here. But the problem is that the whole equation is changed. It's not anymore about Dakhel and Kharaj. It's about young, very young kids and youth that they don't care about Dakhlan, nor Rajub, nor Marwan Barghouthi, not even Mahmoud Abbas, of course, especially not about Mahmoud Abbas. We're talking about a genie that got out of the bottle, and I said it here a week ago, and we're still there. We cannot bring back the genie. It's impossible unless something very dramatic will happen, like in the Temple Mountain. Yes. And this government is not capable of doing that.
Yeah, it's amazing because something really, really big happened yesterday when a Jewish soldier shot a Jewish man because he thought that he is Arab. This is something big, and it seems that if this is not moving both sides to any solution, or even the Israeli side to a solution, it's this, I don't know what
Listen,
will.
Yesterday I published an so-called Israeli offer to the Jordanians and the Palestinian Authority to limit or to decrease the number of Jewish visitors in the Temple Mountain. And immediately the politicians from the Jewish house or Jewish home came and said, no, there will be no government if they will allow it. Now, the basic demands of the Palestinians are not even close to that. What they demand is that the Waqf himself will be the one to decide who will go or not on the Temple Mountain. So with that far, with the gap is so big, I don't see any horizon. I don't see an exit plan out of this huge mess.
Hot potato, Avi, talking about this at this particular time to limit, the numbers of Jews coming to the Temple Mount.
Yeah, yesterday we saw Benjamin Netanyahu with Angela Merkel. Before we'll continue discussing with you about this and the point of the international community, I want to just go back a little bit to what we spoke earlier. 2 Hamas operatives stabbed an ultra-Orthodox Jew in Bet Shemesh today, wounding him lightly, but a major incident might have been averted. I-24 News correspondent Mirav Savir went to the town to investigate.
An unusual morning in Ramat Bet Shemesh, a new neighborhood west of Jerusalem, a community made up of mostly ultra-Orthodox population. Here, 2 men, one a Hamas operative, the second a former prisoner, both from the Hebron area, carried out a stabbing attack. They tried to board a bus, but civilians prevented them from getting on. Tzvi lives down the street from the bus stop and witnessed part of the incident.
I heard gunshots from the house and went to the balcony. I saw 2 terrorists lying on the floor, moving, trying to get up. Only when the officers saw that they could get up did they shoot again. They were shot as necessary in order to neutralize them after stabbing my neighbor.
The three were taken to Hadassah Hospital. The Israeli civilian wounded is being treated for light injuries. One of the attackers was dead upon arrival. The other is in a serious condition in an induced coma. One woman who passed by on a bus before the incident happened said that she saw two men sitting here, one of them fidgety with his hands under his legs, moving like this. The other one calmer, more sure of himself. Just meters away, there's a synagogue where we are told there are hundreds of people every morning.
They tried to get on the bus but couldn't, and thought maybe to enter the synagogue. This synagogue is the most central one of the neighborhood, with about 400 people every morning, and it was a miracle they couldn't get in.
Residents tell I-24 News that they alerted police at around 7 this morning, about 40 minutes before the attack happened. But they say police didn't respond immediately, leaving them to wonder, what if?
Police came too late, after we alerted them about suspicious men. If the attack would have happened when we first called, this could have been a catastrophe.
The two men entered Israeli territory with both legal and illegal construction workers. And the neighborhood is still being built, with Arab workers present on a daily basis, making some members of the community nervous.
There is no roadblock. This is a new neighborhood. It's somewhat isolated, not too far from Hebron, maybe 10 to 12 kilometers, and it's really easy for them to get here.
According to residents of the neighborhood, there are nearly a dozen kindergartens in the area, with kids running around. And some say they are nervous to leave their homes. It may even be time to move.
Yes, I want to take you, gentlemen, to yesterday. Yesterday, we saw Benjamin Netanyahu meeting with Chancellor Angela Merkel after he said and he blamed that Hitler, the intentions of Hitler were not to kill the Jews and to exterminate the Jews. Just Hajj Mufti of Jerusalem, he gave the idea to Hitler to exterminate the Jews. Seeing Benjamin Netanyahu in front of Angela Merkel, for me, it was the first time that I saw Benjamin Netanyahu really in some kind of tension. He understood, well, maybe he understood that he did a mistake, and maybe the pressure right now that is coming from the EU, and we saw that there is more pressure coming from the EU than from the UN, is starting to impact.
Yeah, last night, in a social event, I met one of the closest friends of Benjamin Netanyahu, and we spoke about this.
Haj Amin al-Husseini, yes.
No, Haj Amin is not a close friend of Bibi Netanyahu. But he told me quite clearly, look, on the desk of Bibi, there is a book on that issue, and he is dying to find out, the first opportunity to speak about it. I think that on the substance, Benjamin Netanyahu, after what he said, I think that he still believes, that this is the reality, historical reality. I think that
he believes that this is a historical reality. It's not that we're saying that Haj Amin al-Husseini was loved Jews or something, but he really believes that Hitler had no intention to exterminate the Jews.
I think that he wanted to correct it today, when he spoke with Merkel, because he understood that he could have phrased it in a different way. And it is easy to phrase it in a different way because he wanted to show that Haj Amin al-Husseini was supporting of the Nazis. And this is a reality on the ground. So he could have said this, in a very simple word. Now, if you will go to the history, and there is a lot of historians who wrote about this and spoke about this.
His father is an historian.
In the 30s, the National Socialist Party, wanted really to dislodge the Jews, to kick them out, from Germany. This was the idea. But what Bibi Netanyahu did, he mixed, the periods, the 30s and the 41, when Haj Amin al-Husseini met with. But there is no doubt about the affinity of Haj Amin al-Husseini.
Was written 20 years before the meeting with Haj Amin al-Husseini.
Yes. More than that, Hitler and Germany killed more than 1 million Jews before they met.
Yes. The first the extermination camp was at the beginning of 1941, few months before the meeting with Haj Amin al-Husseini. But this doesn't say anything about the affinity that Haj Amin had to the Nazis. And this is what Bibi Netanyahu said. He wanted to say, and he said it in a very poor way. I'm sorry, but it was a mistake.
Let's talk a little bit about the international community. Again, John Kerry meeting Benjamin Netanyahu, not in the region, meeting Benjamin Netanyahu in Germany to talk about the situation that is happening in Jerusalem. This is also a statement coming from the United States. This is the statement that's coming. You know what? We're not even planning to come there.
Why bother? Why bother? I mean, let's be honest. What can he do? He understands. I mean, he's not that stupid. Okay, he tried, he invested months and months, 9 months, in order to bring peace agreement between two sides. He understood that both are not that interested and enthusiastic. So coming here while King Abdullah of Jordan and Mahmoud Abbas refused to meet Benjamin Netanyahu. So for what? Let's sit with Netanyahu in Europe, and then we'll talk to Abbas and we'll talk to Abdullah separately. And this is what he intends to do. On Saturday, he's going to meet Mahmoud Abbas. The thing is that, then again, there's nothing here that we can see that might bring two sides in order to solve.
But you know what? I want to take it to another step, because I want to understand why the United States canceled a planned meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas that Mayor Shetrit, former Justice Minister, tried to arrange between the two sides. Why to do that? Why to tell them, no, we don't want you to meet? Because it wasn't initiated by the United States, so it's a hurt ego?
I don't know. I've heard too many explanations, and I don't have the details why they decided to do it. But there was a planned meeting between the two, and it was cancelled. It was agreed by both sides after the killing of the Wabshi family in Duma that they're going to meet and they talk and discuss. That was before the General Assembly in the UN. But then, for some reason, the U.S. administration decided to intervene and to ask Abbas and to ask Netanyahu, stay off, wait. Wait for what?
Wait for what?
Look, the idea behind this at the time was, and it's still, you know, with this, what Kerry have tried lately in the last 24 hours for that tripartite meeting, Mahmoud Abbas says very clearly that, look, to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu without having something in my hand, concrete, substantial, that I can go back with, it's worse. I mean, it's useless to meet him. And Benjamin Netanyahu, I'm talking about the first meeting that you mentioned now, that he was not ready. He says, look, let's meet and discuss. It was not enough for Abu Mazen, and Kerry and the Americans understood that there is no way, you know, to meet together and to bring to something very substantial. And this is why they said, look, don't meet him and don't come. This is the same thing now. Mahmoud Abbas is saying, look, we have the problem of Al-Haram al-Sharif, you know, with the Temple Mount. I would like something substantial. Now,
especially now.
Yes, I've insinuated in you a few things. The number of the Jews, the Waqf is responsible, or the Waqf is not responsible. Look, things are complicated, and not everything is known to the public.
So we're not going to be in a relationship anytime soon, like Facebook is offering. Okay, so it's complicated. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for this. We're going out for a small break. 2 minutes, and I'll be back. The wave of attacks continues in Israel and the West Bank with two separate incidents today, one of them committed in Bet Shemesh by two Hamas members. On the diplomatic front, John Kerry calls for an end to the violence during a meeting in Berlin with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Washington condemns Russia's red carpet treatment of Bashar al-Assad during his visit to Moscow. The U.S. is set to convene a summit on Friday on the crisis, which will be attended by Russian representatives. And Democratic presidential frontrunner Hillary Clinton testifies before a congressional committee investigating the deadly 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. Welcome back to the news today. A Jewish Israeli civilian was shot to death last night after boarding a bus and attempting to steal weapons from IDF soldiers. According to reports, the man said he was a member of the Islamic State. Nevertheless, it is the latest killing of a civilian following the shooting and beating of an Eritrean man last Sunday in Beersheba who was mistaken for a terrorist. The question some are asking is whether security forces are pulling the trigger too quickly. Ayman Siksik has more.
Thursday morning, a few hours after an Israeli man was fatally shot in Jerusalem when he was mistaken for a terrorist, a debate on civilians taking the law into their own hands erupted in the country. Naftali Bennett, leader of the Jewish Home Party and a staunch supporter of Israelis defending themselves with arms, said in an interview with Israeli radio, quote, "Unfortunately, mistakes will happen from time to time. Those who want to ramble can ramble on. We will fight terrorism with every means we have." Jerusalem has seen a wave of terror attacks coming from Palestinian neighborhoods in the eastern part of the city. The unpredictable nature of the so-called lone wolf attacks has left Israeli security forces struggling to prevent threats to civilians. Earlier this month, the mayor of Jerusalem encouraged residents to arm themselves.
In Israel, using our well-trained and professional civilians that are trained, that's why they get a license, is a huge multiple for the defense of the Israeli people. And it's a great way to fight this kind of terrorism.
One of the public concerns highlighted by Barkat was the shortage in security officers required to keep civilians safe against spontaneous terror attacks, at a time when stabbings, shootings, and car rammings seem to be occurring at random and almost everywhere.
People that out of nowhere come out with a knife and hurt innocent people. So we don't have enough policemen all over the area to secure people.
But gun laws in Israel are relatively stringent. According to the Israeli Ministry of Public Security, 160,000 Israeli civilians held licenses for firearms in 2013. 130,000 more licenses were held by security personnel. In order to obtain a firearm in Israel, a permit must be issued by Israeli police together with a certificate of health from a doctor. However, the mental health of those seeking permits is not monitored. All permits for civilians must be renewed every 3 years. The issue entered the national consciousness last Sunday, when an Eritrean asylum seeker was killed in Beersheba after being mistakenly identified as a shooter who targeted Israelis at the central bus station. After being shot by a security official, Haftoum Zarhoum was attacked by a mob. The shocking footage released thereafter has raised the question, when civilians are asked to help police the state, where should the line be drawn?
Yes, and with me right now here in the studio is Dr. Hani Zubaydah. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
And also Dov Lipman. Thank you very much for...
Sure.
Yes. I thought that when it will get to that point, and maybe this is a crazy feeling or a crazy thought, that when it will get to the point where Jews are starting to shoot Jews on the streets, it will stop. Somebody will wake up. But it seems that it's not.
I'm not sure what we want to stop, meaning on the Jewish-Israeli side, and I want to use the word Israeli, not the Jewish side, there are attacks that are going on. We can't have security personnel everywhere. And Beit Shemesh today, 5 minutes from my daughter's school, people there didn't have guns. They called the police. Thank God the terrorists decided to start stabbing the man right when police were there, and they were shot immediately. I'm a person who believes that, yes, assuming that people have guns with permits, and there is a process. I personally applied for one during the last few weeks, and it's going to take time till I can get one to hold personally. Then, yes, that is part of what we have to do in a situation where random people anywhere in the country can start stabbing our children or start stabbing us. And therefore, that's the situation they're in. What we hope stops is that the Palestinians will stop coming and killing us. That's what we hope will stop, and that's what we ultimately have to be thinking about, how to get there. But while we're in the heat of this, I don't think we have any other choice.
Honey, it is surreal. It is, in one way or another, funny, because physically, we look the same. Physically, Jews and Arabs look the same, especially Middle Eastern Jews and Arabs. And the writing was on the wall, that something like that will happen. And after this wave of violence will end, we will be left with a lot of racism all over the Israeli society.
Well, let me start with the tally for the last week. During the last week, 3 Jews were killed by police mistaking identity, while only one was killed by a terror attack by terrorists. Okay, so that's the tally for this week. 3 Jews.
I'm sorry, honey, you have to add the numbers that were shot and not killed that were terrorists.
Yeah, but I'm talking about shooting and killing. 3 Jews were mistakenly killed by friendly fire, they call it. There's no friendly fire. Only 1 Jew was killed by terror attack, to be said. The other issue is here. When a state gives up willingly the power to bear arms and to start creating an own personal security zone or space, there's a problem. Now, I agree with Dov. There's a huge issue. We have people here roaming around the streets with knives, attempting to kill people, which is doesn't make sense to me, and it's a problem that cannot be, and I'm trying to pick my words very carefully.
Yes, I see that.
A problem that cannot be solved by putting a police officer at every street corner. This cannot happen. But we saw in Jerusalem, we have military taking over the center city, which is a problem. This issue, I think, while during the first and second intifada, we had more casualties in human lives, this intifada, the problem will be, as you stated, not in human lives. There will be a rift after these days, and I hope this wave of violence will kind of like fade and we can go back to living our normal lives without looking behind us. If somebody's going to stab us, or are we going...
Will we?
And that's the problem. And that's exactly the problem I'm aiming for. Because I think that this kind of like turn of the head to look who's behind you will not fade from Israeli society for a long time. We are now at the midst of probably one of the worst cleavages between Israelis that I can ever remember. And I think the problem is that this hurts the psychology of the Israeli society, and that will be hard to mend.
I've been talking, we are talking a lot, especially here in I-24 News. Jews and Arabs are trying to understand the situation. And when I speak also with Israeli Arabs, they are saying, just give them a state. Give them a state because it will also solve our problems. Give them a state because at the end of this wave, eventually, if there won't be a solution, again, the Israeli Arabs who are living in Israel will eat the dessert. And the dessert will keep us, as the Israeli Arabs who are living in Israel, always doomed to be terrorists.
Well, I want to be, you know me well, I'm not a racist. We're located now, the studios in Jaffa, with many Israeli Arabs walking around here. I can tell you, for months I've been working here, and I walked to and from the parking lot to the studio freely without issue. I walked here now. Every person that approached me, my eyes are on them. As they walk past me, I turn behind me. Right here on the streets outside our studio. That's going to linger. That's going to linger for a while. And I don't want to be that kind of person. I don't want to be a person who assumes that anyone who looks Arab, I'm not even saying they are Arab, is that way. However, to jump from that and all the repercussions, and it's horrible, and say, therefore, just rush to give them a state, I can't jump there either. I want to give them a state. I want this conflict to end, but I have to also watch out for our security. And everybody knows, and this is so important for everybody to understand, if everyone would just lay down their arms, if the Arab side, the Palestinian side, I want to say, would just lay down their arms today, right now, this moment, it could be done. It can be done. I'm not saying
it can be done with this current government.
Not necessarily, but it can be done. But it can be done. And there is certainly a majority of Israelis that at that moment, I believe, would say, assuming that all arms are down, it will be done. If we lay down our arms, and if we're told, citizens, hold back your fire, police, be extra cautious, we're just going to have more killed on our side.
You remember the talk that we had in a different show, in a different channel. And you remember the time that I told you, me, even as an Arab, I'm living here, you know, I'm living in Tel Aviv. There was a period of time where there was tractors you know, ramming people on the streets. And I said, you know, I'm seeing a tractor. And like, you know, just in a way, I just look at the different angle to go with my car so I won't be just right after. And you told me, really, you feel that? You really feel that? And I told you, yes, I do feel that. And I'm an Israeli Arab Muslim who's living in Israel. And this is what is frustrating. This is what's frustrating me, that I got to the point where I'm also afraid.
Well, I think, well, I'm an Israeli Jew who looks like an Arab, and I'm also partly an Arab, and my name is Hani Zubida. And I shave, and I need to be extremely careful of what happens. And I should say that while walking on the streets, I was in shock when you told me that story. I couldn't really accept or grasp the story that you told me. But then today, the last few weeks, I walk down the streets and there's nothing on my mind. I feel like completely free and I do whatever I want. But then my phone rings and I get this notion from one of our groups or news media or push, and it says another person was stabbed. And for the next 2 hours, I feel like I need to be more cautious about my surrounding. Moreover, I work at a college in upstate, northern Israel, and we have a lot of Arab students. And when I got there this week, was the first day of school, and I felt so comfortable back with my students and with the other people that I was telling myself a certain notion, why can't we all be like the surrounding or environment that we created here? I think that there has to be someone that will take or will grasp the responsibility and the huge problematic aspects of this terror wave and say everybody should stop. But we're looking for that leader and we can't find him recently.
Just before you will react to that, Sunday's terrorist attack in Beersheba saw an innocent Eritrean refugee killed, shot by police and beaten to death by enraged passers-by who thought he was a terrorist. I-24 News went out today to ask asylum seekers in Tel Aviv what they thought of the incident.
They judged him too quickly. No one took responsibility except the bus driver who protected him. He didn't know how to behave. He was in a state of high tension like anyone else. But they didn't do it to other people. We need to learn from this incident. But next time we must understand that the security forces have the right to enforce order.
They didn't kill him on purpose. They suspected him. If you were there, you would have done the same.
It's really hard for us. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but it still really hurt.
Yeah, I feel safe because I'm in my side. I'm keeping distance from any bad things, so I feel safe, yeah.
Dov?
So I just want to take a step back for a moment and say, we're having this conversation. Jews, Arabs, and Israel, we're trying to address it. It's a problem. We're condemning the lynching. We have issues with it, the racism. I think it's critical to just point out, while we're talking about the conflict, if I, myself, the way I'm right now, walked through the streets of, I don't know, Ramallah, I would not end up whole and I would not be alive. In Beit Shemesh today, even after the incident, there are hundreds of Arabs, openly Arabs, walking around and no one is targeting them and no people are suspecting. And again, we have to talk about the fallout from that, but it's a critical distinction to make because I think so much attention is being put on Israel and I appreciate the magnifying glass. And we have to do the self-reflection for ourselves and I'm proud that we're doing it. But let's always keep in mind what other side we're dealing with. On that other side, not only is there no self-reflection, any open Jew who walked through those areas would be killed, would be dismantled, and there would be celebration over it, no self-reflection over what has happened.
One last word, honey.
Well, but the situation is extremely complex, and I think right now what we're facing as a nation is problematic. There has to be the one person that will kind of like rise between the ranks and say, this is it. Because I think if we see the mayor of Jerusalem, if we see all the people that say, carry arms, do this, do that, eventually, 2, 3, 4 years from now, what are we going to do with all these arms? What is going to happen? Are we going to be...
But do you think there's that voice on the other side? I'm agreeing with you that our government now won't do it, but there are Israeli voices that want this. Do you see that person on the other side?
I will say that as somebody who teaches morality and about mores. I don't care about the other person's mores. I care about my morality. And my morality is something that I'm not willing to compromise. While showing the example to the other side, I hope will yield some sort of expected result.
So I want to save our morality, but I have to protect lives first. I have to protect lives first.
Gentlemen, I think that I never was so frustrated in my life, ever, really. But we should be optimistic.
We have to believe.
Yes.
We have to believe that we can keep
Emil
persevering.
Habibi, the optimist.
Yes, the optimist. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for this. I hope that you feel comfortable, at least in the studios of I-24 News.
Do I look uncomfortable, Lucy?
Yes, we are going to some other places where we have a lot bigger problems. The U.S. criticized Russia today for its involvement in the Syrian war 2 days after the controversial meeting between President Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Nevertheless, Washington will convene a meeting on Syria tomorrow in Vienna, which will be attended by Russian representatives. I-24 News reporter Ur Shapiro has more.
2 days after the surprising visit of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to Moscow, the international arena is boiling. The U.S. State Department said Wednesday it is not surprised by the visit, which it also described as not helpful for the Syrian opposition or the Syrian people.
Our concern from the very beginning was that this would potentially embolden Assad and to preserve his ability to hang on to power longer, at the expense of the opposition and at the expense of innocent Syrian people.
French President François Hollande condemned the meeting and said he hoped Putin would convince Assad to step down from office.
Nothing must be done to bolster Bashar al-Assad, who is the problem, and cannot therefore be the solution.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is scheduled to meet his Russian, Turkish and Saudi counterparts in Vienna Friday to discuss a range of issues, including the situation in Syria. Many see the meeting between Assad and Russian President Vladimir Putin as a clear message by Putin to the West that Russia wants to play a diplomatic role to resolve the conflict, in addition to its military role, as Russian airstrikes in Syria continue. There is also a personal interest for Putin himself, whose popularity has risen to 90% in a poll taken following Russia's military involvement in Syria.
It became obvious that in a global conflict there can be no winners. There can be only one outcome, guaranteed mutual destruction.
According to Russia, its Air Force has conducted over 700 sorties in Syria since September 30. The city of Aleppo is in the eye of the storm now, as around 35 people have fled the city after an increase in fighting there over the last few days.
And with me right now on the phone is Hamid Awidat, a reporter from Iranian Press TV. Good evening, Hamid. Good to have you back on the studio, on the phone, or again in our show. Thank you very much. So, Hamid, try to explain to me, how do you see it from your own perspective and on the ground, let's say the Russian presence in this current conflict?
The Russians, first of all, they are not a new partner for the Syrian field. You know, they didn't appear just a few days ago. They were there since the start of the Syrian crisis. But the last update, or the last dangerous accidents that have been happened in Syria, they forced them to have their intervention very hard, especially with their airplanes and especially with their military forces in Syria, because the problem now is ISIS and this dangers that have been almost arrived to the Damascus area, and you know the Syrians now, they need the help of the Russians.
Hamid, most of the attacks that we're seeing against the Syrian rebels. We're not seeing against ISIS. Let's say ISIS didn't even start maybe seeing what this attack can result.
No, the Russians, they say it very clear, you know, that they will fight and they will attack everyone who is taking a gun and who's taking a weapons against the Syrian army. Why? Because the Syrian army is the team and he's the military group that he can fight for the Syrian people, you know, and the other groups, they are militant, they are armed gangs, they are ISIS, they are Jabhat Nusra. They don't care about them, you know. Just they are
Exactly, but
helping
exactly in this point, Hamid, do you think that when we are seeing these fights, when we are seeing the Russians fighting, the Iranians are also fighting, the Syrians are fighting, the international air campaign is fighting, do actually all these forces understand who they are fighting against? Who should they target?
For sure they know. You know, we are not talking about a football team. We are talking about a big countries that they have their control in this world.
That is divided to a lot of cells, a lot of tribes, a lot of different views and different groups. How can you actually know who you're targeting?
You know, they have their techniques the same like the United States. When the United States say that they want to attack the groups of ISIS and to attack, you know, these groups, especially in the northern side of the Syrian country. Also, they have their sources of security and the camps that are about the ISIS groups there, you know. And now the Russians, they did different steps than the United States. They say that they will fight everyone who is fighting the Syrian army. But the United States forces, they say that they will fight the ISIS and also the ISIS group. And also, they were attacking the Syrian army, you know, in some locations and some places. So it's different now. We can't take the United States and we can't take the Russians and put them in the same corner that they are getting or giving the help to the Syrian army, because every one of them, they have their interest. Now the Russians and the Iranians, their interest is to help the President Bashar al-Assad and also to save him, to keep his location and to keep his team there, because he's one of their most important partners there in the area.
Yes, Hamid Awudat, thank you very much for this phone call with us. We're going to another aspect in the Syrian conflict. Iran, Britain, France, Germany, and the United States have asked a UN Security Council sanctions committee to investigate Iran's recent missile test, branding it a serious violation of UN Resolution 1929 adopted in 2010. U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power told the Council that the medium-range ballistic missile launched on October 10 was capable of delivering a nuclear weapon. Iran denied the accusations, with Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif saying that the missile was not designed to carry nuclear warheads, which is making us all really, really calm now. Former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testified today before a congressional committee investigating the deadly 2012 attacks on the American consulate in Benghazi, Libya. The attack killed Ambassador Christopher Stevens and sparked controversy over Clinton's handling of the incident.
I was the one who asked Chris to go to Libya as our envoy. I was the one who recommended him to be our ambassador to the president. After the attacks, I stood next to President Obama as Marines carried his casket and those of the other 3 Americans off the plane at Andrews Air Force Base. I took responsibility. And as part of that, before I left office, I launched reforms to better protect our people in the field and help reduce the chance of another tragedy happening in the future.
And with me here is Charles Belizer. Good evening.
Hi, Lucy.
She took responsibility. Was that enough? Or she will find herself even deeper in this specific scandal? Deeper in the mud.
She had already testified before Congress in January 2013 when she did assume responsibility, and then she deflected blame. So again, you have she's half a magician, Clinton is. She put on a masterful performance here. Here you have a U.S. Secretary of State who had an ambassador killed under her watch under circumstances that are very, very suspect. Security was extremely lax. The people who were securing the compound probably should not have been. It was primarily outsourced to the February 17th Martyrs Brigade, which is essentially an Islamist Libyan militia. That being said, she's again called before Congress, and she turns out looking like the sympathetic figure.
I watch her and I'm saying she was able, if all these weeks we were talking about the unlikable Hillary Clinton, today when she was speaking in a low voice, saying I'm taking responsibility, speaking in maybe a reasonable way, it actually made you believe her.
I have another adjective, presidential. We're in a very, very 100%. Tight race. And you know what? Clinton, really, the campaign, she's taken a lot of heat over the email scandal, over Benghazi. She has weathered the storm. And since the second Democratic debate, she's looking very good. Now Joe Biden isn't running. Yeah. She's going to get a major, major bump in the polls. She'll be 25 points ahead probably of Bernie.
I want to ask you, really, why do you think that Joe Biden decided not to run?
I think that Joe Biden took things too passively. I think he waited for Hillary to fall due to issues like the email scandal and Benghazi, and she didn't fall. She weathered the storm. I think that had he been more assertive and was on stage with her at the second debate, pushing his cause rather than waiting for her to fall, I think he would have perhaps stood a chance. I simply think he realized that he couldn't beat her.
Okay, it's going to be much more interesting.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I believe that next week, when you will be here on Monday...
Yes, that time of the week again.
Yes, it will be even more interesting. Charles Billizer, thank you very much for this. We are going out for a small break, an update from our news desk, and then we will be back for the third part of the news today. Welcome back to the news today. Now we are going to a special interview that Jonathan Regev conducted for us with Alex Giladi, who's a member of the
International Olympic
Committee. It's a rare interview. He doesn't give a lot of interviews, and he is giving a special perspective about the Jewish sports athletes who needs to face everything that is happening here, but abroad.
Yes, and the event happening now, there's a very important surfing championship currently in Oman. It's very important, especially coming up to the Olympics, because it's a criteria to the Olympics. This may decide if you will or will not go to the Olympics next year in Brazil. In the women's category, there are 30 participants representing, there are 29 flags next to the 30 participants. There's one flag missing. There's a certain athlete, her name is Mayan Davidovich. She represents a country called ISAF. Have you heard about it?
No.
No.
What is ISAF?
I think it's International Aquatics Federation, but I mean it's a big story. Usually here in Israel we tend to blame the other side. This time maybe the Omanis should not be blamed. They did everything right. There was a certain problem here in Israel between the Sailing Federation, the Israeli Olympic Committee, the Ministry of Sports, and it's not the first time. And almost every time there is an event in Muslim countries, not all Muslim countries, of course, because there's a wide array of them, but in many of the Muslim countries, the Gulf countries, Indonesia, Morocco, we have seen problems when it comes to Israeli athletes. A lot of times we blame the organizers. This time, we'll hear Alex Giladi speak about it. Maybe it's not their fault, we should say that. And in this interview with Mr. Giladi, we spoke of many issues. Some of them we speak here. Brazil, for example, it's very interesting to hear that perspective.
2022, Qatar.
About Qatar and other issues. Let's listen to Mr. Giladi. He has some very, very interesting things he said today in the interview.
Let's see.
Alex Giladi, member of the International Olympic Committee, thank you very much for hosting us.
You're welcome.
With less than a year to go to the Rio Olympics, how do you see the preparations in the host city? Will they be ready on time?
The preparation in Rio de Janeiro are on schedule, despite the fact that Brazil is suffering now a huge decline in its economy. The real was down 30% from the beginning of the year. That creates a lot of problems. But the mayor of Rio, Eduardo Paes, is doing miracles in the infrastructure and the preparation of the city for its great day. And the organizing committee under Carlos Nuzman and Sidney Levy are working very well, and Rio should be a great success.
The security situation here is once again very tense, and it leads to bizarre situations like the one we're living in Oman these very days, when an Israeli surfer is competing under no flag. I've looked at the site today. There are 30 participants and 29 flags. How did we come to this?
The International Sailing Federation sent an invitation already last year for all the national federation to compete in the World Championship in Oman of the windsurfing. And the Israeli Sailing Federation sent a list of 14 members delegation, and it was accepted and visas were provided. However, the Ministry of Sport in Israel have sent on October 6 a letter to the Federation, says that it is prohibited to to fly to Oman because the Israeli security cannot provide them security. This is against the Israeli law. Israel is not yet a dictatorship, and the Minister of Sport have no authority to prohibit. However, the President of the Federation and the members of the Federation felt that they should decline to go to Oman. And the next day they wrote that they are canceling their trip to Oman. The Omanis, of course, canceled the visas. However, it was possible to sail under the International Federation flag. We care more that the athletes will compete than the other facilities.
You had a very clear stand on this Oman issue. You said Israeli athletes must go and participate. That is against the stand of Sports Minister Miri Regev, who said she does not want to send the athletes if they cannot, their security cannot be 100% guaranteed. It sounds logical to me. Why was your stand so clear against that view?
No, because the Ministry of Sport is not the owner of the national federations of sport. And their responsibility for Mayan Davidovich, the sailor that is there, is the same like the Minister of Tourism responsibility for someone falling from a cliff in Guatemala as a tourist. The fact that they want to take responsibility is from the same tragedy in Munich, 1972, when 11 Israeli athletes were killed. Since then, sport have took a different status and a different direction and declared that the responsibility of security is on the host country. This is their responsibility. Sometimes some countries let also extra security to travel with the delegation. This was not the case in Oman.
This is not the first time that such events have happened. We saw the case of a badminton player, Misha Zilberman, who had to struggle just to get into Indonesia. There were Israeli judo participants who waited for hours in an airport in Morocco. We've also seen Israeli swimmers in the past who competed, but their flag was blurred of the competition, of the television viewers. They could basically not see where they come from. Isn't there any way to make this disappear? Say to countries that host events saying, you may host the events, but you have to accept everyone, yes, even Israeli athletes, and not give them any problems.
That is part of a big effort now by the International Olympic Committee and by the Olympic Sport Federation to make sure that everyone that hosts must host all the athletes that want to participate. And if not, the competition cannot be a qualifier for the Olympic Games. This is a new decision by the Olympic Summit that only 1 week ago has decided this. To implement it is much more difficult.
It's not only events happening in Muslim countries that pose a problem. Many times in which Israelis have to face opponents from Muslim countries in any sport, anywhere, those other participants refuse to come. It may be even from countries that have ties with Israel, such as Egypt or Jordan or even Morocco. Isn't there any way to make this problem disappear? Yes, the Israelis get a technical win and advance, but it makes the whole thing look very bizarre.
First of all, they are sanctioned. If you remember the case of the Tunisian tennis player, the Tunisian Federation was suspended. In the other cases, they usually declare themselves injured. And even in the modern Olympic Games in 2015, we still don't have a painometer, some meter that can give you indication how serious is the pain. If they withdraw because of injury, we are not happy. But Israel should stop looking at itself like preaching the whole world what to do. We have to start and compete and win because of our ability.
Back in the 90s, in the days that some see as the optimistic days, there came an idea to do the Olympics in Tel Aviv and Gaza. Well, the infrastructure in Israel, at least, has advanced since then. Is it any realistic dream at this moment?
Absolutely not. At the moment, I don't see one vote voting for Tel Aviv if it comes to the IOC.
Alex Giladi, member of the International Olympic Committee, thank you very much for hosting us and giving us this interview.
Pleasure.
Yes, that was, of course, Jonathan Regev with a very interesting interview. And right now with me is Danny Swebel, ITV4 News correspondent. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
It's always fun when you're coming here because you're taking us back, especially some to period of times that talks really on what is happening right now,
how
nowadays.
We look back in the past and how sometimes, hopefully, in this case, it doesn't mirror anything in the present.
And today you're talking about Cuba.
I'm talking about the U.S. going against the Soviets and it all related to Cuba. On October 22nd, 1962, President Kennedy announced that the Soviets had placed nukes in Cuba. And in turn, the U.S. responded by setting a blockade of Cuba. Now, this became some of the most tense points in human history where the U.S. and the Soviet Union were on the brink of nuclear war, which would have resulted in complete, perhaps annihilation of the Earth as it is today. So obviously at this time it created a whole series of post-apocalyptic films that showed, what would happen if the world was to end in this manner. Luckily, it did not end. The two sides, after very tense negotiations, were able to make a breakthrough. And the Soviets would dismantle their weapons and return them to the Soviet Union, and the U.S. would declare that it wouldn't invade Cuba. But
when we were looking at it from this perspective, from the history, we were talking about Cuba and how the United States just ended years and years of disagreements with Cuba this year. And we're looking at what is happening between Russia and the United States. And this specific date takes a totally different perspective on things.
It's crazy how times have changed. Now, obviously, yes, the U.S. and Cuba have a reapproachment, and they're starting to rework their relationship. Now, the U.S. and Russia right now, after a 25-year post-Cold War period of relative calm, now we're seeing tension again after Ukraine and Syria. But again, it is nothing like how it was.
Iran. It's amazing to see how the stand of the United States was different from the stand of Russia, and how Russia tried to be like this big factor in the Iranian nuclear deal.
That's right. But the thing is, the relationship between the two is nothing how it was before. Because again, brink of nuclear war. Right now, the situation isn't ideal. But again, leaders can always make a change and make things work. And in the end, when we look back at that history, was it strong leadership that prevented nuclear war, or was it just a little luck? I hope it was strong leadership, and I hope strong leadership today and better minds prevail.
You know what is very interesting in this aspect? Because we saw Barack Obama just talking about red lines in Syria and about the use of chemical weapons. We are seeing that the big factor right now in Syria is Russia, is the one who's trying to fight. And I'm asking myself, this specific issue, what you just brought us, we're seeing the United States and Russia are dividing the skies in Syria, and I'm asking myself, what are the chances that we will again talk about nuclear weapon when we already talked about nuclear weapon in Syria just a few months ago?
It's a scary reality, and this is why at least I could appreciate the U.S. and Russia in recent days coming to a terms of agreement on how they're going to operate in the airspace above Syria. But definitely it's not too late for a reapproachment before things get worse, because things can get better. over the long term, but the thing is we never would want it to go back to that one day when it was that bad and things were on the brink of the end of the world.
Yes, Danny Swabel, thank you very much for this, but stay with me because the current wave of violence in Israel is bringing sometimes a lot of tensions, but sometimes is bringing new initiatives. And these new initiatives, when we're talking about Israelis and Palestinians, when we're talking about Arab cuisine, we're always talking about hummus. And who thought that in this specific, really time with a lot of tension, Arabs and Jews will sit down on the same table eating hummus and it will be okay.
Kobi Tzafrir is doing his bit for coexistence, one chickpea at a time. With the current wave of violence threatening to drive Jews and Arabs apart, Kobi is trying to bring them together. His tool? Hummus. Served at his restaurant in the Israeli coastal village of Kfar Vitkin, located 1 hour's drive north of Tel Aviv. The pitch? A 50% discount to Jews and Arabs who sit down together to share a meal.
Food can bring people together. I believe that most people all over the world just want to live in peace.
Tzafrir advertised the offer on Facebook and was surprised by the overwhelming international response.
I didn't think it would get so big. I was sure that it would make people feel better, to make people excited just as I get excited over it. But I didn't expect it to grow so big and cross international borders, with all the major television stations calling me, and it's totally crazy. It's out of proportion.
Hummus, which is ubiquitous in Israel, is actually of Arab origin. Tzafrir naturally knows this, and thus thought it was a perfect dish to bridge the gap between the two sides with competing narratives and claims.
I think the best thing would be if the people themselves decided to develop such an idea, that it not necessarily only come from the businesses, but also come from people themselves who decide, hey, we should come together and eat together and celebrate together.
At least one other restaurant in the mixed Jewish-Arab city of Akko is following his lead. But are people really coming together to make peace over peas? Or is it the discount that entices them? For Tzafrir, this is not even up for discussion.
The situation might be bad in Jerusalem and the West Bank, but here we don't feel it as much. Here, Jews and Arabs live together.
Are you afraid of Arabs? Are you afraid of Jews? Well, here at this hummus bar near Netanya, you only have people and really good hummus. Anna Arenheim for I-24 News near Kfar Vitkin.
And Anna ate hummus with our own Nasreen Ibrahim together on the same table doing this piece for you. From the Jaffa Port, Israel, have peace. Have a great weekend. Good night.